welcome to Budget 2011, the fine print. We are going to look at some of the tax implications on the corporate sector, not just the corporate sector, individuals as well who have stood to gain from the Finance Minister's budget statement. We've got with us a very eminent panel, of course, and I'll begin by introducing my guest to my right, Mr. D. Muthukumaran, who is Head of Corporate Finance at the AV Birla Group. We've got Uday Ved, who is Head of Tax at KPMG, and we've also got Mr. Sunil Khandelwal, who is Chief Financial Officer at Alok Industries. Thank you, gentlemen, all three of you, for having come in on the show. Now let's begin by talking about the tax receipts, the gross tax receipts that the Finance Minister has spoken of in the budget, pegging that amount at 9,32,400 crores, I think. Now, while that is a 25% increase over the previous year's announced number, when you compare it to the revenue progress that they've made so far in the current financial year, it's up 18%. But in your mind, does 18% still look like a number that's not going to be easy to achieve, especially given the fact that we are talking about the next financial year going to be a difficult one? Muthukumaran, let's start with you.
Sure. First of all, as you rightly said, it's not 25, it's 18 if you compare it to a revised estimate. If you actually see the trend in the last few years, the tax collection increase have been more by 1 or 2 percentage points than the nominal GDP growth. If the GDP real growth is pegged at 9 for next year, and I think the assumed budgeted inflation is 6%, so the total GDP growth in real terms is 15%. So now it's a difference between 15 and 18, which is much less than what actually seems to be on the face of it. So I don't see that being such a challenge to achieve 18% as is actually forecasted at this point in time.
So do you believe it's going to be easy?
If you see, George, over last few years, the policy of the government is to have the moderate tax rates, reduce the incentives, and collect the taxes more by better compliance and through the growth mechanism. So, and I would believe that considering the country is on a, India is on a growth path of 8.6%, in the coming year, certainly I think this 18% or 25%, the way you look at it, seems achievable. And clearly this would be through the buoyancy in the market, the corporates doing well, and more important, more and more stability and moderate tax rates brings larger compliance. So I think one of the key objective for individual taxation, as an example, is to increase the exemption slab this year, and there would be a better compliance. And this has been, I think, the case going forward. In 1997, I think we had hardly 10 million taxpayers. Today we have 35 million. So you see, in that sense, with the falling rates, the compliance has been far better, and I would believe that clearly this should be achievable.
Sure, but Uday, you make a very valid point about compliance being a big support for revenue buoyancy. But the fact is that every corporate you speak to today talks about the fact that rising input costs, rising interest costs are squeezing margins, that corporate performance going into the next few quarters is not going to be as good as it was in the third quarter or the second quarter of the year we are in at present. Sunil, you're a mid-cap company. What's the experience been? And let's just step away from the tax target that the Finance Minister has set. In terms of corporate performance, do you believe that even if you set the large cap companies aside, the mid-cap space, and everyone talks about the mid-cap space expected to go through a significant amount of trouble, do you believe it's going to be really difficult for you the next year?
In fact, looking at the overall scenario today and the kind of growth path, in fact, if I talk about Alok, definitely I see growth coming in, and definitely tax outgoes are likely to go up. But if you look at the macro level, I think the growth story of India is still intact. We're talking about 8 to 9% GDP growth. In fact, if you look at Finance Minister, he has not touched the tax rate at all. And so keeping the tax rate, in fact, he has given some benefits. Keeping the tax rate at the same level, almost same level, he is expecting a 25% or 18% growth. So the India story is definitely banking on the growth story only. And the widening the coverage area, probably as Mr. Uday has said, that probably with the better tax regime, compliances would improve, the more and more people will come under tax bracket, and of course corporates, as I said, the depend upon the individual corporates, but there the growth definitely tax likely to go up only.
So I think I'm the only pessimist in this group over
No,
here.
but I must add actually that actually even economic survey clearly lays out the headwinds for these growth, right? It assumes 9% GDP growth, but if 9% doesn't come through, obviously there is a challenge to achieve this 18% tax increase. Economic survey clearly lays out the three headwinds: oil, global recession, and Indian corporate growth. So we'll hopefully achieve that. It does appear possible. Yeah.
All right, now one of the other issues that everyone was really looking for from the finance minister was some sort of directional signals or clarity more than anything on the direct tax code and the goods and services tax. Last year he said that the DTC would be implemented this April. Today he talked about it being implemented next year. There seems to be some sort of lack of clarity in terms of the direction that this is going to take. The same with the goods and services tax. Would you say that corporate India is a little disappointed in the progress that this is making?
On the direct taxes front, you're right, George. Last year in the budget speech, he did say that I would like to introduce GST together with DTC. So DTC in his mind was very certain as on March 11. And there were a lot of representations which were being made at that point of time on the first DTC, the direct taxes code draft, which was presented. And the government did consider a lot of those recommendations. So we had the second draft being available to or announced in August of 2010. And that has led to some kind of a delay. The other thing which finance minister did say, revenue secretary did say, was the training of the tax officers and better compliance, and I think that has taken its time. Today the draft is before the standing committee of parliament, and clearly I think as it stands today, March 12 seems to be almost certainty. Once the draft comes out, I think on DTC clearly the government has a control over it, so I would believe that the chances of DTC getting implemented are good. Whether the DTC comes into force or not, a lot of the provisions of DTC could get introduced, and we have seen some parts of that in the current act itself. So I think the DTC looks like on the track. On GST front, clearly there is something that he can do, something he cannot do, and that's why he said that he will introduce the Constitution Amendment Bill to get the clarity, the legal clarity on the subject. And of course he needs buy-in from the states, which he did say in this speech today, that that's coming around. So that's something which are in control, something which is not. And I would believe that DTC should come into force. GST, yes, I think it's a question, but ultimately I think it has to come.
All right, we take a very quick break, but we're going to be discussing many more of the tax proposals that the finance minister has made in this budget. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Budget 2011, the fine print. Now, some of the tax proposals that the finance minister has come up with, which we are discussing. One, of course, is the double taxation avoidance agreements, which we'll come to in just a moment. But the surcharge for corporates being reduced from 7.5% to 5%. In the same vein, the finance minister raising the minimum alternate tax from 18% to 18.5%. Net, Uday, what do you believe the impact of this on corporates is going to be?
I think reduction of surcharge from 7.5% to 5% is a step towards transitioning to DTC. So if one sees, there is no surcharge in DTC. So I think possibly he said that 7.5 going to 5, possibly next year when DTC is implemented, no surcharge. So 30% remains at the basic rate. Again, MAT going from 18 to 18.5%, possibly going to 20% under the DTC. So I think these steps are towards transitioning towards the DTC, and that's one reason I said that possibly a DTC will come into force on March 12 definitely. On the overall front, if you look at MAT, again there's a balancing exercise. The effective MAT rate becomes 20% in either scenario. Currently with the surcharge of 7.5% and 18% basic rate, taking the 3% cess, it becomes about 19.93%, and at 18.5% it becomes close to 20%. So I think they just try to keep the overall rate of MAT an effective rate of 20%. But certainly the Indian corporates will benefit from the reduction in surcharge add to the bottom line.
So, but you don't believe there's going to be any impact on you in a negative sense, that MAT going to 18.5%?
Talking about Aditya Birla Group specifically, we don't have many companies which are under MAT, but the effective tax rate in India is somewhere between 20 to 25% for various companies. To bring MAT at 20%, is as good as actually ignoring some of the incentives that are inbuilt into the tax law. And the basic two sources of such advantages are basically A, depreciation, and B, the incentives. So I'm not sure conceptually taking MAT up to 20% and keeping it there for a long time is something in synchronization with the incentives that are given away, or not given away, given in the Income Tax Act. But as far as the surcharge reduction is concerned, Mr. Mukherjee had made a commitment that he is going to eliminate surcharge altogether. So he has mentioned in the budget itself that this is towards the commitment of eventually phasing out the surcharge completely.
Okay, Sunil?
Yeah, in fact, there is no change on as far as corporates are concerned. Corporates which are paying the full rate, that is 30%, they have been definitely benefited by reduction in the surcharge by 2.5%. Otherwise, for the MAT paying corporates, there is no change almost.
Okay. Now, the other angle is if what Muthu said, if you look at 1.5 years back, the MAT rate was 11% including surcharge, effective rate, when the corporate rate was 33%. And so the gap was really big, 11 compared to 33. Right. But if you go on the DTC, that rate got increased to from 11 to whatever 15 to close to 20. Today it is 18. So the gap between the MAT rate and the corporate rate is substantially narrowed down. So that's a part on the DTC. But as far as this budget is concerned, it is moving towards the DTC.
So would you say that it is sort of confirming expectations that DTC will come in April 2012?
That's what he did say that, and I think...
he said that last year even. He said last year that we will have DTC this year.
Yes, so there were issues on the implementation, and I think the new draft went through a complete change from what it was before, when the MAT was proposed to be introduced on book assets and brought back to book profits. There were issues on the capital gains, capital markets, and there were a lot of other angles, which if you see it under the new DTC, the final draft, it's come back to what it is today. So I think the 80% of the recommendations of DTC are what are there in the current act, except making few changes here and there. And then considering that, I would believe that DTC seems to be on the track.
So then, do we actually need a date for DTC to be actually formally implemented? If we are moving in the direction of DTC, if you have these, piecemeal announcements coming out every couple of months, before we'd known it, could we already have had DTC before the 1st of April 2012?
Let me echo what Uday says in response to your question. Most of the regulations that DTC is trying to seek with respect to ongoing tax matters is gradually finding its way into the annual budget. But there are some fundamental changes in the DTC that has not come yet. Whether it is general anti-avoidance, whether it is control foreign incorporation. So there are a host of fundamental changes that are there in DTC. So I presume they will come only when actually DTC comes in.
Gets implemented.
So to that extent, yeah, I mean, coming of DTC or arrival of DTC is going to be a different tax regime than the existing tax laws.
Alright, we'll take a quick break on the show, but when we come back, we're going to be addressing issues about sustainability of tax policy and the need to not veer too much away from signals sent out to the market. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Budget 2011, the fine print. Now, one of the big issues, and Uday, before I come to you and to Mr. Muthukumaran, let me get Sunil's view on this, since he is, like Mr. Muthukumaran, an affected party. The need for a sustainable tax policy. You have tax policy that's been in place for so many years. Over the last couple of years, you've got one announcement being made that this is the way it's going to be. Suddenly, it's changed around. They want something else done. Do you believe that that non-sustainability of policy somewhere upsets the working of a corporate, and also that in your mind it can actually affect investment decisions of people from overseas wanting to come into the country?
Yes, definitely, George. It's very important that the visibility, long-term visibility about the corporate action. Like if I'm planning a project based on certain deductions available today, and the benefit of which I think that is going to be derived over a period of 10 years, definitely, that sustainability as well as the visibility of that deduction continuing for so long has to be there, so as to bring, those kind of a trust in the system or the investment, especially from the outside. If you look at FDI, they would definitely want that kind of a clarity, and definitely sustainability of these policies does impact the long-term investment plans of the corporates. So yes, it's very critical for corporate to know that how the the tax angle on its long-term plans.
Right, Mr. Muthukumaran, your view on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. First of all, the highest level of comfort would be if actually there are no fundamental changes. For example, the limited liability partnership, the SEZ incentives withdrawal, these are actually fundamental shifts in the taxation concept. A lot of money go in, a lot of long gestation projects happen on the back of these incentives. So it's important to have these stability and consistency of these tax provision. The level 2 at least would be actually to grandfather for the existing investments that have already been made. For example, the current SEZ amendment talks about applicability of DDT, which is a dividend distribution tax, and MAT to SEZ come next year. It would have been good to protect at least for the investments that have already been made on the ground, and if those were grandfathered, and if the new SEZs and LLPs are actually brought into the tax net, at least it would have been a level 2 comfort.
Good.
So it's certainly good to have the stability.
Now, Uday, you advise scores of companies on tax, and when you speak to them, what's the sense you get when you tell, when you actually find that over the course of the last few years we've had this huge churn in policy, if you will? Do you get a sense that there may be companies overseas wanting to come into India that say that I don't want to look at this country if there is no clarity in terms of tax policy?
See, there are 2 or 3 factors. One is the simplicity in the law. Second is the stability, in which Muthu clearly mentioned. I think it's very, very relevant. And third is the certainty in the tax environment, or today it is more uncertainty in the tax environment. If you look at in last 6 to 9 months, the kind of tax rulings which have come in, it's really changing the course of the action. There are certain tax positions which were certain for many, many years. It's just got reversed, be it in some of the tax rulings. And this uncertainty in the tax environment has created a lot of issues for the foreign investors. Also, the litigation is increasing because of that. So there is, we do not know how the tax authority is going to react. There is clearly a gap between policy and implementation, right? So whereas the policy level, clearly there are big bang objectives to make things happen in the right manner, to attract foreign investment into the country. It's when you implement at the grassroots level, which is creating an issue. As an example, we have dispute resolution mechanism under the Income Tax Act today. The first year experience is not that good, because when it was introduced, it was a very good measure, and certainly it was to kill litigation before it starts. So I think the whole object was to resolve all the tax dispute before it goes to the court. Now the experience the first year has not been good, and I'm sure it is, the revenue officials have said at the official forum that, look, this is, just don't go by the first year, and we will make sure that it is administered properly. But these are the kind of things which really impact the investors, and the stability point that Muthu made. The SEZ came with a particular objective that they will get the tax holiday for next 15 years. The law was passed in 2006, and for the first time I think the units might have started getting exemption in 2008 or 2009. When a unit was set up, the unit thought it will get a tax holiday for 15 years. Come 2011, of course in 2012 when the DTC comes into force, it was to be withdrawn. But you should protect the existing unit at least, and now you prepone it. So there are a kind of small tinkering that you do. There could be revenue angle to that, certainly, that you want to do some balancing act somewhere. But this kind of small little thing, to create. So I would believe 2 large factors: the stability in the tax policy, and equally or more important, the certainty in the tax environment, which is very critical.
All right, then very quickly from you, all three, since we're running out of time. Muthu, let's begin with you. If you had to rate the FM's tax proposals on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you rate them, and what do you think he did best?
It's certainly very high rating. Instead of choosing a number, let me say it's a very high rating. The reason for that is the overall architecture of the fiscal policy in the budget is clearly pro-growth. In fact, actually, in the budget speech, he has made a mention that he doesn't want to, sort of withdraw the stimulus package, basically because the finance minister would like to see the profits being plowed back into the business to aid the growth in future. So we are making some administrative progress. We are moving towards new architecture of DTC and GST. The rates are not being tampered with, significantly. So overall, it's a very high score.
Uday?
No, certainly I think this is a good budget from a taxation perspective. No surprises or no adverse surprises than what was thought, except SEZ I think is one which I think is preponement by a year and is I think more to generate revenues than anything else. But other than that, no surprises, and that's a stability part which is happening. But what government needs to do is to have the tax administration, do it better. So if it is administered in the right way, certainly it will send all kinds of right signals.
And Sunil?
Certainly 5 out of 5, because there is no impact of taxation. In fact, if you look at overall tax loss on the direct side is 11,500 crore he has estimated, and he has made good out of indirect taxation about 11,300. So net 200 crore deficit in the revenue he is carrying. So there is no adverse impact of taxation to almost I think any industry. Of course, corporate and individuals have also not been impacted. I think from taxation point of view, I think it is one of the good budget.
All right. Mr. Muthu Kumaran, Mr. Uday Ved and Sunil Khandelwal, thanks very much all three of you for coming in on the show. With that, we come to an end of Budget 2011, the fine print. Thanks very much for watching.